We're here to continue our conversations with John Butler. We've been listening to your comments on YouTube. Thank you for them, of various hues, and we like to reply to them. Most of them. Some folks have asked if we can return to the church as a venue because they like it. So here we are back in church. And a slight difference with this conversation, it's going to be a conversation in two halves. The first half, we're going to do the normal conversation with between John and I, and then we'll have an opportunity for spontaneous questions from our visitors here. John, one of the repeated questions that we get on the YouTube channel is outrageously questioning what is the point of meditation. I've totted up based on how long you've been meditating and how many hours a day you meditate, that you've clocked up something over 30,000 hours of meditation. Now, some people might say, when the world is needy, hungry, hurting, and in need of help, what earthly use is it spending that amount of time in silent meditation? Why don't you do something?
Well, as a young man, I thought much the same myself. In fact, I was very, very taken with making the world a better place, and although I did start a career in business, it seemed it didn't seem the right thing to be doing, and I left, and after much opposition from my family, I went to South America with just that purpose, to make the world a better place. I knew a fair bit about farming, and actually I'd heard of that the Bolivian government were giving grants of 1,000 hectares of virgin jungle to any settlers who'd go out there and develop it. And I thought, wow, that's just what I want. I envisaged going out there. I was pretty good with an axe. I was young and strong. I thought I'd fell that jungle, I'd grow crops, and I'd feed the hungry people of the world. Well, I won't go into the details of what happened or didn't happen, but some time after that, I was sitting on top of a mountain. I'd been trying to plant trees at that time to control soil erosion, which I was very interested in. And it had all gone rather wrong. The local sheep and goats had come and eaten my trees off, and I didn't have the money to build a fence, and the support I thought I was getting from the local community didn't sort of quite work out as planned. I was sitting there a bit depressed one day, and it seemed to me a little voice whispered in my ear, to make whole, be whole. And I saw myself as a rather arrogant young man trying to improve the lives of Indians, the local Indians, many of whom were older and obviously much wiser and able to live than I was. And I saw myself, as I say, as an immature young man, full of rather superficial knowledge, which wasn't enough. And so I'd heard a bit about meditation, or had I at that time, I forget. But anyway, I knew I had to make a better job of my own life before I could be of use to others. So in due course, when my time in South America came to an end, I returned home, and I fell into a deep depression. I just didn't know what to do or where to go. I even at that time thought of playing some instrument and working as a busker, because it seemed to me one of the few things you could do without causing offence to anybody and maybe bringing a few smiles into people's lives. But I'd also heard about meditation, and I learned to meditate. And immediately, well, first of all, it gave me a sense of great space. I realized there was a world within myself that I really had no knowledge of whatsoever. It opened up a whole new range of possibilities. So I began to persist with meditation. I was also farming at that time. I farmed for many years. I suppose I saw that as my main work. I was one of the first organic farmers. I was, in a way, a pioneer in that field, and that seemed to me the thing to do. And then it became more popular and widespread, and I felt my time in that had really passed away, and meditation seemed to grow in importance, really. When other options failed, somehow it stayed as about the most valid thing I could do. I couldn't have said very clearly why. Somehow it was free of complications. So much of life was all screwed up and wrong, and meditation was right in a rather hard to describe way. I suppose then I started to think about what man is. What is this life anyway? I began to think of it as prayer. Somehow everything in this life had a limit. I could only do so much. I was strong enough then, but I could only do so much with my hands, wheel a wheelbarrow of stuff from one end of the field to the other. I did a bit of lecturing and writing, but somehow spirit, the possibilities of this inner spiritual world stretched endlessly. What to do about the world, this great question was with me for many years. A quick answer didn't come. And then I suppose I began realizing that I can only do so much with my hands, can't I? Move stones from one place to another. With my mind, I can only reach those who can hear me or read my books. Again, there's a limitation, isn't it? But in this world of spirit, now spirit has no end, does it? I don't actually have to have anybody in front of me to communicate in spirit. Spirit penetrates to every heart in the world, whether they know it or not. It's like invisible sunlight. It goes through walls. It knows no barrier. It's beyond space and time. So as through the help of meditation, I began to somehow get a deeper appreciation of not so much me working, but spirit working in me. This surrender to something greater than I began to be more meaningful. Instead of I being the doer of good, I began to realize that it's spirit itself which is the source of good, and I am like an obstacle standing in the way. It's as though spirit is light, and I'm like a block in the sun, in the beams, and so what comes through me is in shadow. That was a realization. I began to realize that far from being an asset to the world, I was actually a blockage. I was an impediment to the goodness that emanated from spirit. Now then, things began to fall into place. And I began to understand the meaning of such phrases as, "Thy will, not mine," and what it meant to surrender to higher authority. We say that God knows, don't we? Well, it became more and more evident that I, John Butler, knew ever less and less. And it became ever easier to realize that while I am really ignorance, I consist of ignorance, God knows and I don't. Now then, what to do about the world? I don't know, do I? Do you? Does anybody?
Lots of people in organizations around the world, healthcare, education, disaster relief, that they clearly devote a lot of energy and resources.
Well, so did I in my time. I don't know, we're not all called to this work, are we? For some reason I was. Perhaps I wanted so much to be of use in the world. This really was the cry of my heart for most of my active years. What use am I? You know, I would, as a farmer, I saw in a way the whole development of what we call agribusiness, and this whole, you know, when I was a child, chemicals hardly existed. It was still the age of the horse. Machinery was only just beginning to make its appearance. So I've seen the whole transition from that sort of farming to what we're familiar with today. And that was the agony in my heart. How can I help my beloved land? What can I do about it? On my little organic farm, I did what I could, but in a way it was so small, I could only do a little bit. And then I began to realize, again, in contrast to myself as a person, John Butler, we were given access to this infinitely wiser, more merciful, almighty, spiritual power that we may, if we're so inclined, call God. And so the less of me, the more of God became ever more the most practical reality and the most practical work that I can do. And that's how I feel ever more these days, as I see my physical body decline and my mind works slower and slower. So I'm all the more willing to abandon myself into these almighty, loving arms that I feel so obviously about me. I talk a lot about presence, and it just seems to me ever more obvious, this invisible spiritual presence that is actually the benevolence of God, that which created the world in its pure estate before it became corrupted by man, and so fell into its the religious word is sin, into its sinful state, where not only people are at each other's throats all the time, but the whole of nature is killing and eating each other. The whole world has become corrupted by this fall from grace of man turning away from his divine origin, and so spreading darkness in the world instead of reflecting light. That's really the cause of all the trouble. And it was as I began to understand the cause of it all, then I began to see the remedy, which is simply of turning back to the source.
So instead of being part of the problem, which is getting in the way of the work of spirit, you decided to join forces with the pure spirit and do your daily work in the field of spirit.
I wish it was so simple. I wish I could say yes, yes, yes to all that, but I try to. Let's preface all that with the words "I try," because I've reached the stage in life where I see clearly enough to know that there's no better work, and I call it work. I say as I plod up to the church every day for my daily meditation that this is my work, and I really do believe this, and maybe it continues long after the body fails, is in its grave. Of course, I don't know what after death any more than anybody else does, but it seems to me that as the body fails, so this real work, what I call, in contrast to the less real work, you can put it in the world, becomes ever more evident.
And rather surprisingly, instead of a harvest of chickweed,
Yes.
Measured by the sackful, now you've got a harvest of, 1 million views on this thing called YouTube.
Well, I don't know if I'd call that a harvest or not. I feel very humbled by the fact that it has happened. I don't quite know how or why, but I'm humbled and feel very privileged that it has, and I hope what I say is of use to people.
At this juncture, I'm going to invite Noel from Dublin in Ireland and Martin from Holland, who joined us for this week of silent meditation. I'm sure you've got a question that you might like to put to John.
I'm Martin from Holland, and I'm going to ask a question to John. So I wonder what your take is on the concept of mind, what we call mind. And I say this because in many practices this is like a big topic, and usually they want you to think about where your thoughts come from, what they are, who am I, stuff like that. And therefore I ask you this question.
What do I think about mind, or what
have you discovered?
What have I discovered about mind? Yes, that's better. I don't trust these questions, what do I think about mind, because I've learned to distrust the thinking process. Whenever I hear myself or anybody else start a sentence with "I think," I'm immediately on my guard. Mind. Well, Martin, I've got one very simple way of approaching all these difficult questions, because one of the fruits, you could say, of meditation is that it brings you to stillness. Now that's, first of all, stillness of the body, which is a good way to start meditating, just sitting comfortably on a chair. But as anybody who's tried to meditate will soon find out, there you are, you sit to meditate, you may or may not close your eyes, but what are you beset by? Your turning mind. Now, any effective method of meditation gradually it takes your attention through this discursive mind, which is, you could call it thinking. I often use the analogy of thinking being rather similar to clouds in a sky. Clouds in the sky, always different, always moving. Well, usually moving anyway in the wind. Sometimes, like thoughts, they just stick there and they don't move, but they do eventually. Well, meditation doesn't really deal with thoughts. It uses this effective way of taking our attention beyond it. So that just like an aeroplane, you go up through the clouds, and even on the most overcast and gloomy day, you come up into the clear blue sky above. And there, strange to say, there are little or no thoughts. It's just clear clarity. I won't try to use words to describe it, because the moment you start trying to describe it, you're back in the realm of words and thought. So we have to use words like clarity, emptiness that's also in a strange way full, because it is totally satisfying. How can that be? Well, try it for yourself and you'll see. And there's no thought there. And the deeper you go into this state of higher consciousness, which it really is, you realize that that is unchanging and yet totally fulfilling. There are no questions there, no doubts, no uncertainty. So questions such as, what about the mind, really loses relevance. In fact, all questions do. Questions belong to this state of discursive mind, or you can call it duality, when you think in terms of this and that. Me trying to understand something, and me being separate, trying to get your knowledge, or ask a question of you, or ask a question of an encyclopedia or something that I don't know. But in this state of completeness, and it's very hard to convey unless somebody has the experience for themselves. But I hope something in my voice maybe can convey to you that I know it so well now that it is beyond question, literally. And mind really becomes like a play of clouds. It's like movements in the ocean, ripples and movements in the ocean, or in the air. At its own level, of course, it's very relevant, and you can spend a lifetime trying to sort it out and play with it and ask questions, and the whole system of education you can see is like this. Learning, books, all this thing. And yet, it's only a very limited part of man's potential. And although we start from this level of mind, and mental practices serve their purpose in leading us onto the spiritual life, we simply grow out of them. And that's really the answer to your question. It's all right in your time. When I was a child, I thought as a child, but now I'm a man, I don't. You simply grow out of this fascination with the mind. There you are, I've answered your question, haven't I?
And would the body be also a cloud? The body.
You grow out of your body, don't you? Look at me. I'm halfway to the grave, aren't I? Creeping along with my sticks. My body hasn't got much go in it these days. But you see, as the more one lets go body and mind, the more one grows into spirit. And spirit looks back, as it were, on all these previous parts of your life, sort of down a long tunnel. Once upon a time I used to read philosophy. Good heavens. What's happened to that? Once upon a time I used to try to sit cross-legged and even read all sorts of holy books and that.
That brings me to another thing I wanted to ask you. Do you still read the scriptures?
It sounds rather an arrogant thing to say, Martin, but having been sort of fairly well acquainted with the scriptures since a child, I've probably So my answer is not much, not now. But I often recall bits that I know by heart. Yes, I do. That does come to my mind, and the hymns and the lovely prayers that I learned as a young man.
And when you recall them, are they like clouds as well?
Well, they're clouds with light on them. They're light clouds. But in deep meditation, all such things are left behind, all of them. There are no words because a word, but the very fact that it's a word means you put a limit on it. And spirit is completely, well, if I use a phrase like beyond description, I don't quite know. I don't suppose that means anything very much. But you sort of shy away from description, because the moment you try to describe it, you're back in the world of thought and limitation.
Hello, my name is Noel Sheehan. I'm from Dublin in Ireland. I'm visiting with John here in Bakewell, and I just have a short question, but maybe it's a large subject perhaps. Maybe the subject might be termed the purpose of life, and what you were saying earlier on about the draw to finding one's source, to finding the truth of who you are. And I think St. Francis put it very well when he said what you're looking for is what you're looking from. And you did mention too, I think at one stage, about it, the amount of years you've been involved in this too, and I know myself would be 40, 50 years. So the amount of time and effort to try and to get through the clouds of your poem that you mentioned, to get to the truth of yourself. And if my understanding is correct, that the truth of yourself is already fully present. So what's the game about? Why are we born? What is the purpose of this? Which seems in a certain way can be interpreted possibly as being cruel, that you're separated and you work through your conditioning to reveal yourself again as fully present. And this may be the mind now judging this as suffering. So that's my question. Why so long and so much struggle to find or re-find or reveal who you really are?
When I first went to the school of meditation, where I learned to meditate, I was asked a question: what do you really, really want? Now, if you ask yourself that question, not everybody will give the same answer, because the purpose of life seems different to different people. And some people see it as this, some people see it as that. So, if you'd spoken to me then about finding out myself or what I am, I wouldn't have been interested. I didn't want to know that at all. I wasn't. It seemed completely nuts to me. But what I did want, I remember I asked the question, I said, I want God. Of course, I wasn't too sure what God was either then. I'm still not. But I also wanted love, perhaps love and freedom. But not everybody would say that. Most people want love, but not everybody wants to be free. So, what is the purpose of life? Well, it leads on through life. The question is, the purpose may change as one matures, as one, as it were, perhaps achieves or gets near one purpose. Another one may open up. A more universal sort of purpose may open up. Yes, that makes sense, because, see, to begin with, our purpose is really what I want. It's an individual thing. But later on in the process, the I, the ego, gets less, and you begin to think more universally. And even beyond that, there is a yet deeper urge when it's not really for any purpose at all. It's just for love's sake only, one could put it that way. But that may not mean very much to us when we begin, because it's so much, the question is so much sort of encompassed around by me. What do I want? Which is so often in conflict with what other people think you ought to be doing.
Yes, I think to many people, the sense at the beginning, we said it there early on at the start, there's a strong sense of I, and I want to be happy, or I want love. And most people at the other end, after years, there's a sense of the I is the impediment, yes. And by dropping that, you fully reveal yes. Who or not what you are as natural love. But the length of time, parent time, in the play it takes, and the suffering to go through your conditioning and see that, and maybe let go more and allow this wonderful radiance that you are. What you're looking for is what you're looking from, and to really understand that takes so long, and you wonder what's all that about.
Maybe that's why all merciful God gives us 80 years on this mortal plane, because it takes that long.
Yeah, we need every minute, isn't it?
I think we do need every minute, and I'm still learning, I assure you. And I look back on life as a great school where we learn, and you know, we learn by making mistakes, we learn by our mistakes, by our errors. And it's through a long process of elimination. We find what we think we want, and we find it's not enough. You know, you find some wonderful love affair which lasts so long, and then it goes. It's not. So really, by eliminating, then we finally come to what. Well.
What's left is what we really are.
And who knows what lies further beyond. I don't think there is a point. God is infinite, and who can ever say they have reached the goal? I'm rather distrustful of that sort of talk. I feel much safer saying I don't know than I do.
Thanks to Martin and Noel for their questions. If you've enjoyed this format of a conversation in two halves, and you would like to participate in the next conversation with John on the video, then by all means leave a comment and get in touch. It's something that we're considering doing more of, if you would find that useful. So until next time, hasta luego, ciao, bye.